exhausted. I am finally across some of the most drab, flat landscape the state has to offer. I'm now just off of I-90, just south of Blue Bluffs State Park. It took me about 2 hours to get here, going about 80 miles an hour the entire way. It is absolutely exhausting doing that. My ass is numb. I got some water for cooking, washed off the windshield, filled it up, and I'll be ready to check in and get my campsite started. I don't know if I'm going to have any time to do anything but just make dinner and go to bed and hopefully rise early. We'll find out. But, all right. Almost there.
Around the same time Colonel Flandreau led the New Ulm exodus to Mankato, the former Minnesota Governor Colonel Henry Sibley arrived in the Minnesota River Valley with 1,400 men. Numerically, it was pretty substantial. However, when it came to their utility, they were almost useless. The horses of the mounted men and the men themselves were horribly inexperienced. The men at their command were competent, however their forces were horribly under-equipped. Much of their ammunition was of the wrong caliber and had to be remade. Historians write that at the time, with the Civil War raging to the south, the force was the least equipped military force on the North American continent. The Dakota were numerous and well-seasoned. The militia were physically underprepared for the battle-hardened and substantially more muscular Dakota warriors. Sibley would have to make his decisions very carefully. U.S. soldiers taken from the front lines of the war against the Confederacy to the south were allocated to the war effort against the Dakota, but they were still arriving at Fort Snelling in the Twin Cities. Sibley first sent scouts to New Ulm to make contact with the population, but found it had been deserted the day before. It was then decided that they would move to Fort Ridgely and bring the first relief to the fort since the war had begun over a week ago. They met no resistance upon lifting the siege. It's imagined that Dakota had moved on, but it wasn't clear where. Unknown to Sibley, Little Crow had a band of 110 warriors northeast of New Ulm. They had spotted Sibley's forces moving west and decided to regroup. Graybird, another Dakota chieftain, had a force of 350 warriors heading down the Minnesota River Valley. Historians agree that had Sibley not brought his forces marching through the valley as a distraction, Little Crow may have attacked St. Peter or Mankato. It's on the record stating that unprotected, St. Peter would have easily been pillaged and Mankato would have been quite a battle. Upon arriving at Ridgely, Sibley's forces were believed to find ammunition and artillery weapons that would make their force more useful. Sibley, now in command of a substantial force on the front line, was able to survey the area to assess threats and bury the dead. Many volunteers in his command had marched across the state with Sibley's force to find out if their relatives in the valley had survived or been slaughtered. Nathan Merrick was eager to find his brother, Andrew Jackson Merrick, who was the merchant at the Lower Sioux Agency who refused to give provisions to the Dakota on credit and famously stated, "Let them eat grass." Sibley sent out a force of about 220 soldiers to feel out the enemy. They were to first survey the damage at the Lower Sioux Agency and bury any dead they could find. According to accounts from the soldiers on this detail, the march up the river was full of death and desolation. The dead lied everywhere, many who had laid out in the open since the first attacks over a week prior. A young boy was found hung from a tree, and one soldier cried out after he'd found his brother upon coming across a corpse on the side of the road. The soldiers killed at the Redwood Ferry crossing were still lying out in the sun, their bodies drained of blood washed away by the Minnesota River. Upon arriving at the Sioux Agency, it was carnage. The bodies of men, women, and children were strewn about. Nathan Merrick found the body of his brother, badly beaten and with grass stuffed in his mouth. The men stayed overnight and were not attacked. Feeling confident, they moved deeper into the reservation and found what was supposedly the encampment of Little Crow himself. They looted his teepee of drums, headdresses, and his other wares as souvenirs. To survey the area more, they crossed over the river and camped by the Birch Coulee, a small river where they could bring their horses to water and a rest after a long day of burying the dead.